All right, boys and girls, now is where it gets exciting because this, I hope, maybe it never gets exciting, but this is where I get excited. Well, no, actually, I never get really all that excited. Um, we're going to talk about loading and saving animations, bone animations. Uh, and I also want to mention parenthetically this that I didn't certainly didn't invent the concept of loading and saving bone animations. As the old Archimedes said, I'm resting on the shoulders of greater people than I that came before. I think I've done it better than anybody, but all modesty aside, that's just the way it works. But in any case, let's just give you an example. So we got the bones here, and you notice I pressed a whole bunch of keys down there. I actually have a routine where I press K and it sets keys for every bone that's in the group. That's kind of useful sometimes. So I've set keys on all these bones. So I'm going to grab the root, move it over here, just move it off to that position. And I'm also going to move this target bone up and, I don't know, maybe rotate this one around just to give a little bit and then kind of do that thing. Okay, so I've done some things. So here's a little animation thing that goes up like that. It's not really a useful animation. You wouldn't necessarily have that. But now I'm going to save this. Now, if I just go up to save, it's going to save starting at frame 1 and go until it reaches the last key in the file, which is 66. If I load that in the next time, no matter where I am on the timeline, it's going to have all these frames prior to the very first key. That's because you might want key timing and things. So, however, you can also adjust that by simply doing the control and setting the play start and the play end. You only need the play end if you have keys that you don't want to record. So, for example, if I had keys past here, then I could go up here and click there, and it would only record the animation to this key because that's the last key before that, and if any keys after this frame would be ignored. But since I don't have any keys other than this, it's just going to record these two keyframes. So now I go here to save, and I press it, and it's going to go into these places where I can save things. And I'm just going to call this parent test. And so now I have this animation saved. I want you to notice a couple of things. So it ends up doing, he starts here for the root, and he goes to here. So now he's in that position. I'm going to come in and load this in. And by the way, where it loads, my cat just turned on my computer again. Will you stop turning on my Macintosh? All right, I'm going to shut this down. My cat, for some reason, wants to lay on the... all right. There. All right. Fine. So anyway, this... I'll get to this in a second. I'm just laughing. What did I just say? Parent test, right? Parent test? Is that what I said? Okay, parent test. Okay, so now it loads in this animation. So the first animation, see, went up. So the root stayed here. So now when it loads in, notice that the root stays right where it was, and now it goes from there, progresses from there. If you've seen any of the other bone animation loading saving programs, they don't do this kind of relative animation, which makes it very tough to just drop an animation on the timeline because your character might be standing over here and suddenly it gets reset to over here. So this is actually relative to where the root bone was. Okay, got that? So relative to the root is how that saved that. And that's very important to mention because we're going to get a little more complicated later on. This is really good for doing a lot of cycles of things where you want the character to progress across the screen too. Okay. So anyway, so that's a parent animation. So now, I'm going to bring this down here for a moment, and I'm going to unparent this, and we're going to do an unparented animation. Show you the differences here. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I'm going to have him bend. Oh, yeah, no, actually, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to set a keyframe, and then I'm going to have him bend down, and maybe this foot goes there, and this foot goes shooting out there. So he bends down. There we go. Kick, dong, kick, dong. I don't know why you want to do that, but he can put his hands behind his head and then really have fun. I don't know. This guy, I don't want to get too saucy here. Anyway, so this is the animation. So once again, I can save just this portion of the animation by going in here and pressing Control. Not that one. I just got through on the Mac, so I was trying to remember to press the Option keys, and there's the control key. So I set that there, and I'm going to go to save it. And I want you to notice one thing is the bone animations by default come into a directory. It looks for a directory called bone animations in your content directory. So that's one thing, and I'm not real proud of the way this I/O works, but that's all I can do. Sorry now. So I'm going to call this unparented test. Okay, so now the unparented test has him do this. Okay, so now I'm going to load this in again. I want to show you something very interesting about this. Unparented test. Okay, now notice here he bends down. So notice his root is down here. And now when we load in that again, notice how this leg slides down further. The root stayed exactly where it was. So it actually got loaded relative to the root. Okay? Just like the parented animation did, right? Remember how that worked when the parented was loaded in here and then it went up relative to the root here? Here, the root goes down, so the root bone is there. So now it sets that position up again, just like it was before, and then it goes down again. Okay? Well, that's not always the most useful thing to do. Usually what you want to have happen when you have targets, when you have something unparented, is you want it to be relative to one of the other targets. Assuming you have two targets, or if you have more, whatever. But you want the animation to be relative to that target. So as he bends down here, what I think I would like to do is I would like to have this particular target be set solidly. So if I get rid of this here, I'd like to have this target set. And then when he does it again, I want him to straighten up right where he was the last time. So in order to do that, I have to save it relative to this target. And all you have to do in this particular case is just select that target. So notice right now, when I saved it before, it said the target was the root. That's because there was no other target selected. And even if I select this bone here, the bicep, it still says root. But once I select a target, then it changes to target. And that's the bone that will actually then be, what am I trying to say? That's the bone of which the relativeness of the animation will be applied. Now, I could do it from here, and I want to show you how it looks if I apply it relative to here. It's going to basically fix this bone right to here when I save the animation, and all the animation will be around that. That might be useful sometimes. We'll call it unparented test 2. And now we'll load that in here. I'll show you how that looks. It's going to look a little different now if I go to unparented test 2. Notice that his leg comes up there. So now his leg is I just want to point. His leg is right up here in the air. Now watch that target bone. You notice that target bone still stays there, and it resets itself to that position. So it's kind of like he's and you could use that sometimes if you were, for example, if you were stepping up, you might want to have that bone there, planted, and he steps up on something. This is the wrong animation for that. But however, what I really want to show you is, in this particular case, what I think I want to do is plant this bone and save this target as this. So I'll save it as unparented test 2 again and just replace that. And now when I come to here and I load in that animation again, now you'll notice that his bone stays planted. So his foot stays planted down there, and then when I come to the second animation, see that stays firmly planted, it just goes there. So now he does these kicks there. So you can load it in one of two ways. You can load it in relative to the root or relative to either one of the targets, or if you have more than two targets, you can load it in relative to any target you want. And how that's going to be important is when we come down to walk cycles. And I will be showing you that in the next particular video. But before I finish with that, I want to talk about a couple more things with saving and loading bones. First of all, you notice that we have an unparented animation here. We're in an unparented state right now. I'm going to load in that parent test again. And the first thing it does is it parents the bones automatically and then loads in that animation. So it does that for you. So if you make a mistake, or you don't have to worry about whether an animation is parented or unparented, it loads it in and correctly adjusts that for you. The same way as if here I'm in a parented state, and if I load in an unparented animation, then it will correctly unparent itself. Now, it unparents itself and then it moves a great deal distance because that happens to be where the particular target was planted at the time, so you'd have to move that around. But in any case, it will do the parenting and unparenting properly for you. What else I want to tell you? There's an origin left here. This is only if you've saved a bone animation for a rig that's right-facing, and then you want to load it in on a rig that's facing the other direction. If you don't have origin left, then it screws up all the bone assignments. So This way you can load in if all of your rigs face the same way. And I don't mean that all your characters have to face the same way, because obviously you can flip your characters around in the direction that you want. But if all the rigs are generated the same way in the base position up here, and you save your animations that way, you don't have to worry about it. But if you're saving an animation with a character that's got a different orientation, you can check that box, and then that will flip the animation around. You always know if you load an animation in on a character that's oriented the wrong way from your character, is that suddenly everything will be back asswards. So you'll notice that. So that's why that's there. The other thing about this is, speaking of loading them in different rigs, this will allow you to load it in on different characters. And whether the characters have the same bones or not, it loads in as much of the bone information as it can. Now, it's a good idea to have very similar named rigs. Obviously, this guy could have maybe like skirt bones if he was a female. You could have some skirt bones to control skirt or hair or something. And all this basic animation would still load in properly and play. It just wouldn't have any animation for those extra bones. Conversely, if you had, say, hair or skirt animation that you saved, and you try to load it in addition to leg and arm animation, only the leg and arm animation would load in, and it would ignore the other bone information. It also attempts to try to rename some things. So, for example, my naming convention, I think you can see, is that I have a D, and then I have a name for a bone, and then I have a U. That stands for upstage and downstage. Some people use A or B. Some people put suffixes instead of prefixes. This bone animation I have will actually it will attempt to correctly sort all that out, so that even if you load a rig that's renamed or named differently, it will attempt to load it in on a differently named rig. Now, if all your rigs are named approximately the same, then you don't need to worry about this. You can even name your rigs, B1 to B22. That's a terrible, horrible, awful way of trying to name bones on a rig, and it's something that no professional would ever do, but you can do that. And it doesn't matter. For the purposes of this bone loading and saving, it will handle it as long as the bones have some name. But bones have to have a name, or the animation can't be saved, and it certainly can't be put onto it. So that's about all for now. We're going to try one last thing, and I'll see you on the flip side.